on tour with the Sex Pistols, almost by accident. I'd go in to see their first show, and then was saying goodbye to them as they were taking off on their bus, and I just kind of mentioned, oh, too bad I can't come with you, but I'm sure you're going to have a good time. And Malcolm said, well, you know, we were only allowed 12 people, and then he counted up, and he said, well, that's only 11, Bob. Why don't you get on? So I found myself in Texas a couple of days later with the band, and Sid actually on his chest. People think that there's cuts, and there are cuts and scratches. I'll get to that in a minute. But he had written on his chest because he didn't really have contact. The road managers were keeping him away from most of the fans. They were trying to hide the band and kind of limit the chaos, while Malcolm was trying to maximize the chaos. Right. So Sid had written on, and Sid was crashing from a dope habit. And he was trying to score, but since he couldn't really meet the fans, he had written on his chest, if you look closely, he wrote, "Give me a fix." Gimme, give me a fix. And so that's most of the lines on his chest there. And then there were some girls in the front who had come, I think, from California. They had hitchhiked to the gig, and they were down front, and one of the girls, I think her name is Helen Killer, kind of beckoned to Sid to come down closer, and he leaned over towards her, and she punched him in the nose, which he seemed to appreciate, because I was on the side of the stage, and Sid suddenly stood back up with a big smile on his face and blood pouring out. And, you know, I worked with other bands like Kiss or Alice Cooper that do theatrical kind of tricks. And my first thought, because there was so much blood and it was so sudden, was that Sid had a theatrical pill or something that, you know, in certain stage presentations, an actor can bite on a pill and blood, you know, will pour out. So I thought it was stage blood, but he was smiling and grinning, and then he kind of wiped the blood and sort of splattered it back at the girl, and then she was spitting back at him, and he was spitting back at her, and kind of splashing the blood, and then the blood kind of dried up. So he went back towards his amp, and he picked up a beer bottle off the top of the amp, and he smashed it on the amp. Now, this is while the show is going on, and the band is playing, and the kids are screaming or whatever. But Sid kind of got distracted by this little interaction with this girl. So he took a beer bottle off the top of the amp, smashed it on the amp, and then was about to cut himself some more, or maybe he actually did scratch himself a bit more. There were some scratches on his chest there. And the road manager, Noel Monk, jumped out from the side of the stage and grabbed Sid's arm before he could really do some serious damage to himself, you know, and kind of stopped him from cutting himself with the beer bottle, and looked at Sid like, what are you doing? And Sid kind of looked down like sheepishly, like, oh, yeah, I guess I shouldn't do this, you know. And Noel took the bottle away, and Sid turned around, and the band was kind of yelling at him, like, play, Sid, you know. And he started playing again, and he couldn't hear him. And he said, "Sid, we can't hear you." And so he turned back again, and apparently he had turned off the amp. Like when he hit the bottle on the amp, he had hit the switch, and actually had turned the amp off. So it was a pretty chaotic moment.
And how can we know the name of the girl in the audience?
Well, actually, I had met them. I meet a lot of people. I had met them a year earlier when they came to New York. They'd come to CBGB's, and they were pretty obnoxious, trying to be very punky. And actually, I had gone to see Frank Sinatra that night with David Johansen, and we were dressed in leisure suits, and they were kind of making fun of me for, you know, being a guy in a leisure suit, rather than realizing that they were in New York because they'd seen my pictures. But at the end of the night, nobody else would let them go home, and I let them sleep on my floor. So I had gotten to know them when I knew who they were when they showed up in Texas.
Right. And any idea why she punched him in the mouth?
I think it was just part of the excitement of the show. You know, it's how the fans, you know, in England they used to spit on the people.
Yeah.
You know, as a way of connecting. I think it was just a way of connecting with Sid.
I
mean, it wasn't anger. They wanted to spend the night with him.
Yeah.
You know? I think Noel Monk kept him out of the hotel, and then it was her and her girlfriends who sprayed the bus. You know, there's pictures of the bus where it says "Anarchy" and "We're so pretty," or "Anarchy in the USA," I think, and "We're so pretty." That wasn't done by the band. That was done by the girls who had hitchhiked there from California, and absolutely outraged our poor, unassuming, very sweet guy of a bus driver. And he had to find some way of getting the paint off, the graffiti off without getting the paint off, which a couple of days later he managed to do that.
And just tell me a little bit more about the shot itself, Bob. Whereabouts are you there? Is that I'm trying to place I can see a little bit in the background. I can see a figure to the left of Sid.
Well, I was on the side of the stage.
Right.
I guess stage right. I'm forgetting which town it was. Was that? I could check if you want to hold on a second. I just wanted to make sure. It's in Dallas.
Right, okay.
During the Pistols tour.
Thanks. And just tell me, Bob, would Sid be aware of you during that? Would he be aware you were taking his photograph? Or?
Probably.
Right.
Although it wasn't like I don't think he was posing in a sense. There were other people around with cameras, and he was being photographed pretty constantly. I mean, I was on the tour. Joe Stevens was on the tour. I think Roberta was at that show. And, they had been photographed pretty continuously for a while at that point. And
did you sense that he enjoyed having his photograph taken, or was he too much out of it?
Oh, yeah, no, he liked having his picture taken, and he would pose for pictures.
Right.
There's a picture I have of Sid eating a hot dog.
Yeah.
Where he's got the button on that says, "I'm a mess."
Yeah.
And when I took that picture, it was during a sound check, and we were both getting a hot dog at a stand in the back of the auditorium, in the back of the theater.
Yeah.
And I picked my camera up to take a picture, and he said, "Wait a minute." And he took the ketchup bottle and then the mustard bottle. He smeared a lot more ketchup and mustard on the hot dog, and then just went and smeared it on his face, which I remember because I was kind of shocked because I wouldn't do that to myself, just purposely smear ketchup and mustard all over your face. But then he held the hot dog out, and then he was ready to have his picture taken.
Right.
So, in other words, it wasn't just candid. He was contributing to the look that became Sid Vicious.
Yeah. And just, again, to go back to this picture, what, if I've been there, what I've heard, what were you hearing at this point?
Oh, everybody was screaming and yelling, and there was pretty much chaos going on.
Would the band be playing?
Yeah, the band was playing, definitely.
Right. Yeah.
But the music was sort of the soundtrack to the chaos.
Yeah. And were you aware when you were photographing the Sex Pistols how culturally important they would become? Were you?
Not at all.
Oh, right.
Not at all. I had no clue. I went there because I knew Malcolm.
Yeah.
I had met Malcolm when he was in New York with the New York Dolls. They hadn't really made a big stir in the sense of, mainstream culture. They were sort of an oddity.
Yeah.
It was not, there was a big term back then in those days, no commercial potential.
Right.
And many bands fit that, like all the bands that played at CBGB's,
yeah,
who are now world famous, were considered no commercial potential because it was so far from the mainstream. And, a band like New York Dolls was fun and interesting and new, but I don't think people really had a sense of history of how influential it was.
Yeah.
And I had met Malcolm, and then, people think I went to England to cover the punk scene. But although I had the NME, even the punk scene was rather small at the time.
Yeah.
I remember the first story I saw about the Sex Pistols.
Yeah.
Because I used to get the subscription for the NME because I sent them pictures
yeah,
of people like Led Zeppelin, or maybe they were interested in the New York Dolls sometimes, or Queen, or the bigger bands.
Yeah.
But it was only like Rock Scene magazine or Cream magazine that really was interested in what was then called the New Wave.
Right.
Scene. It wasn't until after Punk magazine was around for a couple of months that people started calling it punk music.
Yeah.
It was called New Wave. And in fact, last week, The Clash had a press conference here, and there was like some slides of reviews and so on, and one of them actually I pointed to my wife. I said, "You see, this is New Wave band The Clash." That they weren't called punk yet. So I went to Europe because my son had been there for a couple of months with my mother-in-law in Paris, and I missed him, and I just went to visit because I made some money with Kiss and the Bay City Rollers.
Right.
And I'd never been to Europe. And the only people I knew in England was Ray Coleman, the editor of the Melody Maker, and Malcolm McLaren, who I met when he was with the New York Dolls.
Yeah.
And I called Malcolm. He got me a place to stay, and he took me to a place called Club Louise, where I met The Clash, the Sex Pistols, Susie and the Banshees, Billy Idol, Caroline Coon and John Savage. I'm not sure if Elvis was there. I know Marco Perrone was there, the Sue Catwoman, and those, that crowd.
Excellent.
And I basically met the nucleus of the punk scene. It was like Max's Back Room in New York. It was like they were all there in one place. And I saw the Clash play.
Right.
And I was blown away by their power and their fury and so on. And I didn't see the Sex Pistols. Didn't see the Sex Pistols play actually until they came to America.
Right.
Although they did do one kind of short rehearsal bit when I was taking pictures of them at their Denmark Street studio. And I wasn't frightened of them. I thought they did the kind of music I liked, but just a little louder and faster. And so I was kind of surprised about the whole controversy. And when they came, and the fact that they cursed on TV and they became a big sensation, I didn't think that was, really a cultural shift. I thought, well, these guys got lucky. The English newspapers had a slow day and they decided to make a big deal about somebody using a curse word on TV. It didn't seem that culturally important to me.
No,
And I remember specifically when I went to Atlanta, because I'd seen them twice in England, not play, but I'd go in there the first time taking some pictures with Glenn in the band, and then I'd come back in November taking some pictures with Sid, and I went to Luxembourg with them for a day.
Yeah.
So I got to know them a little bit. So when they came to America, for me it was kind of a bigger band because Cream magazine liked them and Rock Scene magazine liked them and Enemy, and so I knew I could sell a couple of pictures. I expected them to come to New York. Actually, they expected to come to New York. They were supposed to play Saturday Night Live. And Sid had a visa problem, so they didn't make it in time. And in fact, if you ever see a replay, a YouTube video of Elvis Costello on Saturday Night Live, Malcolm McLaren, when the Sex Pistols couldn't make it, he recommended Elvis Costello.
Right.
And the drummer is actually wearing a shirt that says "Thanks, Malk," because it kind of broke Elvis in America.
Yeah.
But the Pistols went straight down to Atlanta, which sort of pissed me off because I had to fly to Atlanta to see them. And in those days, you could do that for $150 round trip, or or less. I mean, it didn't cost much to travel in those days. So I went to Atlanta, expecting to spend the night and come back in the morning.
Right.
So I basically only had my camera bag. When I got on the bus, I didn't have a change of clothes.
And how long were you with them for?
And I was with them for like 10 days, the whole trip. I woke up in San Francisco, like, what am I doing here? And I came straight home. So I was surprised. What I was going to say is when I got to Atlanta, and Alan Tenenbaum was there, Lynn Goldsmith was there. I'm not sure the names of the other people, but it was like Rolling Stone was there, the New York Times was there, Village Voice. Major... I think UPI, I think it may be, one of them was shooting for UPI. Like major news outlets were represented. And I was really surprised. That's why I remember it, because I couldn't understand, like, why they were interested in this bad punk band, that was just... I remember the first time I played the record. I went to England and stopped by Malcolm's office, and he gave me a copy of the new, the brand new album that was just coming out that weekend or something. And, and I went over to Sheila Rock's house, who had a pretty nice stereo system. Yeah. And we played it and listened to it. And I called Malcolm back, and I said, is this a test pressing? You're going to mix this, right? This isn't finished, right? And he said, no, mate, that's it. And I was like, you got to be kidding, I mean, I had heard loud music like Alice Cooper and New York Dolls, but this was just chaos. And I thought, and now it sounds like anthems.
Yeah.
But I remember calling back from Sheila's house and going, is this it? This is finished?